welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Inside Sports Studio. Another edition of Football Talk is on its way. I'm your host, Charles E. Smith, Jr. This week we'll be taking a look back at the games of Week 8, but more importantly, a midseason report card for the NFC. We'll see who are the contenders, who are the pretenders, who's real, who ain't real, and what are the major disappointments, and who is most likely to contend as we go ahead and move along here. As you know, I cannot do this by myself, so I enlist some of the best talent here. I pay them top dollar, signing bonuses, steak and lobster dinners once a night, whatever it takes. Here he is from footballnation.com. Some of you follow him on Twitter at Chris L Sports, none other than Chris Lardieri. Chris, what's happening, man?
How's it going, Charles? And just so you know, I don't always ask for that. Sometimes I just want to double it in and out, but it's always appreciated.
Animal style?
No, I just like mine with grilled onions.
Okay, all right, perfect. So let me ask now, I know you've been blowing up Twitter there at Chris L Sports, but more importantly, everyone who likes your most eloquent writing, what's the latest at footballnation.com?
Why, thank you. This week's FN Follies column is titled Michael Vick on a Short Leash in Philadelphia. Sorry for the play on words. My editors have a good sense of humor, too. And it basically, it basically talks about how big question in Philly is, will it be Vick or Nick, a.k.a. Foles, starting at quarterback for the Eagles this week? Andy Reid hinted he might make a switch. Whether he does or not, at this point I say it's a moot point. I mean, the team's spinning out of control. They've got no offensive line. Their defense playing poorly. Vic's been turning the ball over left and right this year. They've blown a couple leads. And even if he does switch to Foles, Reid knows his days are numbered there. So at the same time, it's almost some sort of win-win for him, because if he does bring Foles in and the team rallies, maybe he saves his job. If not, at least he gave it a shot. We all know last year he wanted to switch over to Vince Young, and that experiment didn't work.
Right.
So either way, it's just one big soap opera in Philadelphia, the likes of which we probably haven't seen this side of the Meadowlands, where Tebow and Sanchez and the Jets reside. But could be very interesting to see what happens there, where he ends up. What happens with this Eagles team? Do they blow it up? Is Vic playing somewhere else next year? So a lot of interesting storylines there, especially for the Philadelphia media.
Most definitely. So, let's take a look back. And, of course, this past week there was, they were playing the Falcons. There was a possibility of an upset. Didn't happen. But, Falcons look like they're back. But let's take a look at some of the other games of the week. And, let me ask you, what were some of the more surprising things? Was it the way that the Dolphins just took care of the Jets? I mean, beat them 30-9. Then you have Vic Ballard in overtime against the Tennessee Titans with a dramatic twisting touchdown. And then what about the Steelers in their bumblebee prison uniforms, terrorizing RG3 all day long and shutting down the Redskins? Another team, though, that's in trouble, that is the San Diego Chargers, who lose 7-6. 7-6 to the Cleveland Browns. 7-6. And then, of course, your boy Dez Bryant against your Eagles, who, this just sums up, I think it's just such a microcosm of the Cowboys and Dez Bryant as a player, just the way things go. There he is, all set to be the hero, instead 2 fingers down, out of bounds on what would have been a spectacular touchdown catch and probably would have been game over at that point. But alas, he's out of bounds. Giants win, their 4th in a row. Cowboys lose.
Yeah, football truly is a game of inches. And I tell you, I was getting so frustrated watching that Dallas Giants game, but every time I wanted to leave the room and turn the game off, I was reminded of my new best friend Tony Romo giving the Giants another gift, and Stevie Brown took 3 of them, had a phenomenal game. Every time Romo giveth, he taketh away. That said, everyone's raving about the Giants. They're one of the class of the NFC, which I agree with, but very lackluster performance on offense, too many field goals. I think the defense, Romo threw for over 400 yards, Witten at 18 catches. Not a very inspired performance by the Giants on defense, so they're really fortunate to escape with a win. That said, I mean, the Cowboys look like a completely undisciplined team, and at some point this has to fall on the feet of Jason Garrett. He doesn't seem to have his team prepared. Questionable play calling. You get the ball late in the game in Giants territory. You're looking to put the team away on 1 yard to go to get a first down, and he's throwing the ball and going for the end zone, and then Romo's going to force it up and gets picked off. So
exactly.
I think he's, if not at the front, moving closer up the list on the coaching hot seat.
Well, let me ask you, do you think that maybe when you look at the Giants and their, well, let's call it a lackluster performance, especially when you look at it numbers-wise overall, but do you think maybe them jumping out to that 23-0 lead just so early in the game, maybe they got back on their heels a little bit? And then once the momentum shifts, you know how old Mo goes, it starts to shift, it's hard to get it back.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's almost like they started coasting and taking it easy, and it was even reflected in the play calling, trying to run the ball a lot. I mean, this isn't college. I really don't think you should be criticized or penalized for running up the score. Not that the Giants would do that, but I mean, the NFL, you got to put teams away, and when you're up 23 in the first quarter, no lead is safe. I mean, we all remember that old Bills-Oilers playoff game back in the early 90s. So, and anything can happen in an NFC East matchup. So, I really think Coughlin's probably in his glory this week, because not only does team win, he's got a lot to criticize and complain about. So he could really crack the whip and say, hey, boys, the Steelers with their, as you put it, hideous bumblebee uniforms, I like to think they were kind of a Australian rules football uniform of sorts. I haven't seen anything like that since that or rugby, but very hideous, and I apologize for ripping the Tampa Bay Buccaneers creamsicle jerseys. They're nowhere near as ugly as those Steelers ones. But, big matchup this week in the Meadowlands. Coughlin will have to get the troops ready for it.
Yep, and of course in our picks segment, which comes up in the second half, we'll be talking about that. But let's go ahead and get into the NFC, and let's talk about, at midseason, the best and the worst. So we talked a little bit of pre-production, and when I asked for your top three in the NFC at midseason, you took the Falcons, the Giants, the 49ers. The Falcons at 7-0, the only undefeated team in the NFL. The Giants, we talked about, they've won 4 straight. And then the Niners with that number one defense, only allowing 12.8 points per game. So talk to me about those 3 teams there. We talked Giants a little bit. How about the Falcons and 7-0, but they look like they maybe shook off that. They looked kind of shaky for those 2 games. But then they had the bye week, and they come in and they just smoke the Eagles with no problem.
Yeah, they got the cobwebs off, and I think there's a team on a mission this year. That said, I don't think they're going to run the table and go 16-0, but I don't see anyone getting in their path in the NFC South. And provided no one gets hurt or any major bumps in the road, they should have smooth sailing to a bye in the number 1 seed in the playoffs. I was thinking about it, and this team kind of reminds me of the Peyton Manning era Colts, where you've got an up-and-coming quarterback, 2 excellent wide receivers, and a running back to pound the ball. I mean, you think back to like Marvin Harrison, Edgerrin James, Reggie Wayne, etc. with the Colts, and
right.
Those teams didn't end up winning the Super Bowl until later on in the 2000s. But they kind of remind me on that. They're really balanced on offense, and their defense can make some plays. Who knows? They may be in the NFC Championship game before you know it. Yeah,
true. So, it does look like the Falcons are hitting on all 8 cylinders right now. So, we'll see. But they've got a matchup this week we're going to talk about too, and that's Dallas going into Atlanta. Atlanta winning 7 in a row, and maybe this is one of those games that Dallas just kind of seems to pull out of their hip pocket every now and then. But let's go ahead and talk about the Niners. The number 3 of those top 3 teams, 6-2, best defense in the league as far as points wise. But still, the Niners, you got to think there's a few question marks in there, maybe just a little bit. You look at Harbaugh, and it seems like he really wants this to be a controlled game. He's really putting the focus on Frank Gore, not making Alex Smith go out there and try to win these games on his own or show off his arm or anything. This is a really structured offense that Harbaugh's got running there in the Bay Area.
Definitely, and that's why I was surprised when Harbaugh kind of abandoned the game plan so early in the big matchup against the Giants a few weeks ago. He kind of got away from running the ball, and the Giants almost dared Smith to throw. He got picked off 3 times, and the route was on. So I think he's getting back to basics. I really don't think the Seahawks are going to pose too much of a challenge to them in the NFC West. That's another team that if they keep rolling could easily end up with a bye week, and they're going to win it with defense. And ultimately, the 49ers are going to become a championship team. Alex Smith's going to have to make some plays in January,
right.
And we saw the Giants stymie him in that great NFC championship game. So a lot will hinge on which Alex Smith shows up those particular weeks in January. But until then, I don't really see anyone getting in their way either, especially with that defense.
Right, and I think that was one thing when you talk about the Giants game. I think Harbaugh, when you play a game like that and you're talking about playing against, arguably the best, at least in your conference at that time, those are the games you measure your team against. You look at how they perform, and then that's when you start tweaking things a little bit. So maybe that's when he realized, hey, we don't want to have Alex Smith going out there and trying to go head up against the other QB. It's about playing as a team and just, staying together, playing a good controlled offense, like they did against Arizona. Arizona, I think, really, he could have had Smith put the ball up 40 times if he had wanted to, and they probably still would have won, and probably by a greater margin. But they really stuck to a disciplined game plan on this past Monday night game against the Cardinals, a game that they had in hand from the start.
Definitely, and you look back to even week 1 of the season where they had a similar game plan, but then when things opened up a little against the Packers, Smith made the throws and Smith threw touchdowns, and everyone was gaga over Alex Smith for a week. So he can do it, but it's just a matter of following the game plan and getting the defense back on its heels or questioning what they're doing, and he can make plays. But like I said, from week to week, you don't know whether he will make those plays or not. So it remains to be seen. But definitely, with Frank Gore and that defense, I firmly expect to see the Giants and 49ers potentially facing off again in January at some point.
Okay, so let's go from the best in the NFC to some of the disappointments. The most disappointing 3, we got up there, the Eagles at 3-4. They've lost 3 straight games. The New Orleans Saints, now at 2-5, they won the Super Bowl in 2010, and oh, how the mighty have fallen. And then last place in the NFC North at 3-4, the Detroit Lions. Great things were expected of them, and they just haven't lived up to it this year. So we talked about the Eagles a little bit and their woes. Let's go ahead and talk about the Saints. And when you talk about a woeful defense, and I've seen some bad ones over the years, but no defense in NFL history has allowed more total yards in the first 7 games of any season. And if you watch that Sunday night game with Peyton Manning and the Broncos, they just marched up and down the field on them. In fact, I sent you a text during the game. I said, the Broncos can't even run out the clock on these guys, because every time they tried to keep the ball on the ground, they were just gashing the defense for 5 and 6 yards at a time.
Yeah, that was clearly the varsity versus the JV right there. And while I didn't think the Saints are going to be a Super Bowl contender this year because of all the suspensions and the uncertainty at head coach, I think they're a major disappointment in that their offense really hasn't clicked like it should, and the defense is just so atrocious. Everyone thought with Steve Spagnuolo coming in, he'd turn things around, but this defense is starting to remind me of last year's Buccaneers squad, which set records for ineptitude. So the sheer fact that they're just not showing up on the defensive side of the ball is really just a major disappointment and a major surprise to me. Because I figured they'd at least be competitive, and even against the Broncos, I figured they probably wouldn't win, but at least they'd hang in the game, maybe have a shootout, maybe keep it close, whatever. But yeah, this just looks like a team that I don't know if they've quit or they've never had their head in it or what, but very unfortunate. And Sean Payton's probably thanking everything for his job security next year.
Yeah, there you go. And then what about the Lions? 3-4, they were supposed to be up there and maybe contending, but geez, just hasn't worked out for them. No one really having a big year. Even Calvin Johnson not really having one of his better years this year. And Stafford, I don't know if he's taken a step back, but this is just not the team we expected coming into the season this year.
Yeah, we knew they had problems on the defensive side of the ball, but they're not even getting a pass rush, and they're already weak secondary, just getting picked on more and more. And then Calvin Johnson, I think what's happened, and even now more so what Nate Burleson done for the year, defenses are just keying on him. I mean, they're double teaming him. I believe he only has one touchdown this far this year. And what's odd is this team actually misses the running game. I mean, Kevin Smith kind of stepped up last year when Javid Best got hurt, and there's just been no one to step up and run the ball. So teams they're just keying on it. And the Lions are another team. You know, I thought they had an outside shot of at least being a wild card, and just classic underachievers this year. And you know, Stafford sometimes has to try and force the play, and he's getting picked off. It was nice to see them beat the Seahawks. That was a win I didn't think was going to happen, but you know, who knows? I mean, they got a gift from the Eagles a few weeks ago. Maybe we'll turn things around and get some momentum. But if Calvin Johnson isn't producing, I don't expect too much the rest of the way.
All right, so that's a look at some of the more disappointing teams, of course. You know, the Eagles, the Saints, the Lions. And let's talk about some of the others. And one of them which I'm sure they'll want to hear from, and the fans out there watching, they're going to say, what about our team? Great defense, second by percentage points only in points allowed on their defense. They won 5 straight games, yet they were not mentioned in that top 3. And, of course, you know I'm talking about the Chicago Bears. But when you put them under a microscope, Mr. Lardieri, I think you might see a few little cracks in the armor.
Definitely, and those cracks are mainly on the offensive line, and even against a team like the Panthers, which by no means are a powerhouse and are having their own struggles, Cutler got sacked, knocked down. I mean, the game was essentially close because the Panthers' defense were keeping them in it, and were it not for Cam Newton throwing a gift of a pick six that the Bears took back, who knows, the Panthers might end up winning this game.
Right,
but
yes.
Until that team starts protecting Cutler and giving him time to get the ball to Marshall or dump it over the middle, they are going to have problems. Now, they could try and run the ball, but, you know, if you've got an offensive line like that and Cutler's going to end up on his back, I mean, teams are essentially just going to stack the line and hope for Cutler to throw. Now, if they turn things around, I honestly think the Bears are a good playoff contender. I don't think anyone wants to go into Soldier Field in January against that defense and potentially the duo of Cutler and Marshall. They've got as good a shot as any to make it to the Super Bowl, but they've got to straighten out that offensive line, or they're going nowhere.
That's true. Even at 6-1, you got to look at what a team's expectations are, and if their expectations are to get to the big dance, then those are the things that they got to straighten out. And let's talk about another team. You know, set a lot of, you know, rolling up record yardage and numbers last year with the Green Bay Packers. And even this week, they really had to struggle to beat the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, granted, they basically have no running backs at this point. The NFL trade deadline was pushed back a couple of days because of the storm. Otherwise, they might have already made a move. But there's been talk about teams inquiring about Steven Jackson over there at St. Louis and D'Angelo Williams out of, you know, with Carolina. But you know, what do you think about the Packers at this point?
That's the problem. They don't have a running game, and now the receivers are starting to get banged up. Jordy Nelson, Greg Jennings going to be out for a few weeks of abdominal surgery. And yet again, that defense, which defense shows up? They start getting lit up or they get into shootouts. I don't like the chances for the Packers. If they can start to get some semblance of a pass rush, force some turnovers, stay in games, yeah. But in January, you got to be able to run the ball some, and there's just no one there. And like I mentioned a few weeks ago, Ryan Grant looks pretty good compared to the other guys auditioning for that job.
Yeah, most definitely. So, you know, I think Aaron Rodgers, definitely he's the man with the plan there at quarterback. Love him as a QB, but what he's doing now is I think he realized, you know, it clicked over a little bit, I think, during that Seattle fiasco, but they're going to be in dogfights now. And I think that, you know, Rodgers can win those dog fights because he's a tough quarterback. But you got to remember, fight and scratch for every inch, and you know that's what the team is at this point. They can win those games, but the days of the blowouts, the 15, 20-point cushions, they're over on both sides of the ball.
Definitely, and you know what? Those dog fights wear you down, and that's when the injuries start and your team starts to get tired come the end of the year.
Okay, so, you know, let's get into our favorite segment here. And by the way, everybody, we're going to be reviewing these. We're going to give the AFC a midseason report card on next week's show. But right now, let's go ahead and get to the picks of the week. And I dare say we've both been red hot lately. The season standings, I'm standing at 29-18. Chris, with that narrow margin, 30-17. We were both 6-1. I'm sorry, I was 6-1 last week. You were 5-2. For the last 2 weeks, though, I was 12-2. You were 11-3. So it looks like we are really, the CNC boys are heating up on these picks, and that's why people watch football talk right here on Inside Sports, man.
That's right. They want to win.
Okay, so let's get right into it. The games of the week. First of all, the Cardinals started out 4-0. With this past Monday night, they just lost their fourth in a row. Cardinals at the Packers. Cardinals 4-4, Packers 5-3. Are there going to be any surprises there?
No, I'm going with Green Bay. I don't see Arizona winning on the road, and as you hit on, they're kind of in free fall right now. No running game. Larry Fitzgerald's been shut down. Question marks at quarterback, and I think the Packers, while they struggled at times with Jacksonville, I think they get back on track, at least offensively this week. The Cardinals really don't pose too much of a threat. I'm going with Green Bay.
Okay, and well, for all the reasons that you just said, no further analysis needed. I'm going to go ahead with Green Bay as well. A little too much turmoil there. And plus, when you talk about running backs hurt, who are they down to at running back in Arizona as well? So, and that's a team with only one receiver to throw to again. So kind of in the same boat as the Detroit Lions, as we talked about earlier.
Definitely.
Okay, so how about the Dolphins? Now, the Dolphins 4-3, going into Indianapolis to play the Colts. Two young quarterbacks. Well, Tannehill may not start. He's got that quad injury. We don't know if he'll go, but Matt Moore was admirable as they went and squashed the Jets this past weekend, and Matt Moore started as a rookie last year for the Dolphins. He came in, doesn't skip a beat, and they just keep on rolling. Not quite as dramatic as Earl Morrall coming in for Bob Greasy during the undefeated season way back in '72, but you get the idea, not much drop-off with Matt Moore playing at quarterback for the Dolphins.
Definitely, and that's why, regardless of who starts, I'm going to pick your Miami Dolphins. Well, I'm definitely impressed with Ballard running the ball with the Colts. Andrew Luck's been great. A lot of come-from-behind victories this year. I just think the Dolphins really have some momentum. They get good balance with running the ball with Reggie Bush and putting the ball in the air. And even if Moore has to start, I'm sticking with the Dolphins. He's more than just a serviceable backup. Some people think he'd actually make a decent starter, as he showed in stretches last year. And I think your Miami Dolphins are on a roll, and I'm going to play the hot hand.
There we go. And, of course, the Colts had a dramatic win this past week, but I'm going to go with the Dolphins as well. And I'm going to like to see how Andrew Luck does against the Dolphins' defense as well. Will he get caught in the wake? And I'm talking about Cameron Wake, as you know. We'll see about that, because the Dolphins have some great defense as well. And I think this is going to be a game where they can really showcase it. And if they win this game this week, I think that you're going to see the Dolphins talked about on a lot of the your standard talk shows, your ESPNs and NFL Network and stuff like that. So the Dolphins are going to be for real. This will be their fourth win in a row if they take this game in Indianapolis. I got the Dolphins as well.
Yeah, and who would have thought this would be almost a must-see matchup here in Week 9?
All right, here's a good one for you to pick. The Vikings at 5-3 at Seattle. Seattle at 4-4, but Seattle's at home. You know, the vaunted 12th man in Seattle. The Vikings are going to want to make amends for laying an egg against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last week. How do you see this one?
I'm going with Seattle. Just for whatever reason, this team always seems to win at home, no matter who they play. On the flip side, the Vikings have been really good at home this year, not so hot on the road. And you mentioned the 12th man. I think that'll come into play. And, Seattle really they could have hung on to beat the Lions last week. Let the Lions get a late score to let the game get away from them. Russell Wilson's doing a serviceable job at QB. He's making the passes he needs to. He's not making the big mistakes like some other rookie quarterbacks would. I'm going with the Seahawks. I think they get back on the winning track this week.
Okay, and I gotta go with you on that. And for really, you pretty much covered it there. And I like the 12th man factor in Seattle. And whether or not it affects the other team as dramatically as we think, it gives Seattle knows and thinks they can win in their building. And plus, you got Marshawn Lynch against Adrian Peterson. What a great matchup at running back. So that there again, I think kind of a little bit of a must-see game. And I got to go with Seattle as well. Okay, so let's go ahead to the next matchup, which is Denver, 4-3, going into Cincinnati. Cincinnati at 3-4.
I'm going Broncos. This team's clearly on a roll since the momentous comeback against the Chargers. The Bengals, as I'm still bitter over, had their chance to beat the Steelers, and I made the mistake of picking them. So part vindictiveness, part Peyton Manning is really coming into form. And not only do they have McGahee at running back, they've got this kid out of San Diego State. His name escapes me right now. Really playing well. So I think they're getting more well-rounded on offense, and their defense looks good, Denver. So I'm going with the Broncos.
Well, I'll tell you what, I could go ahead and try to analyze this game better than you did, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going with the Broncos.
Thank you. It's great minds think alike.
There we go. So now here's where the great minds might start to fragment a little bit. And this is possibly, very possibly, I think it could wind up being a Super Bowl preview game here. And that is the next one. The Pittsburgh Steelers and the New York Giants. I love this matchup because there's a lot of similarities with the teams here. The strength of both defenses in that front seven, not necessarily in the defensive backfield. Two quarterbacks who know how to handle this type of situation, two quarterbacks who know how to make plays, two quarterbacks, 4 rings between them. A great matchup this week. What do you think?
Normally, I would think this is a pretty clear pick for me. I would think the Giants, after coming off a lackluster performance, they're lucky to get a win, would bounce back and play the Steelers. Now, in the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy, my family, I've got a lot of friends there without power. The area is just completely devastated. I'm not sure how that's going to affect the Giants. I'm sure their practices are going to be short and whatnot this week. But on the flip side, does that give some of these bruised up guys like Nix, for instance, and Bradshaw, some more rest? So kind of been going back and forth on this. My gut tells me the Giants will win this game by the narrowest of margins, in yet another Eli versus Roethlisberger matchup. But by no means do I expect it to be a shootout. I think the defenses are going to show up, and at the end of the day, I think the Giants win one for the storm-ravaged tri-state area.
Yeah. I think I looked at this game the same way, and I started looking at it, and I just put it down to the narrowest of margins. So who's got the edge at quarterback? What about the running backs? The Steelers have some injuries at running back. Mendenhall, I think, is supposed to be back, but Redmond, I think, is still hurt. Then you got the offensive lines where the Steelers have had problems. Then you got the front sevens. So a lot of the strengths are similar with these teams. When I cut it down, though, where I think the Steelers have the edge, I'm going to look at Antonio Brown and Mike Wallace getting free able to do a little bit more against the Giants secondary than Victor Cruz will do against the Steelers secondary. And, like you said, not a blowout by any means, but I think by the narrowest of margins. I think when it comes down to it, just a couple more plays in the Steelers' favor, I go with the Steelers to squeak this one out in what's going to be an epic matchup. An epic matchup. Nobody should miss it. I got the Steelers beating the Giants by the narrowest of margins.
I could easily see that, especially with the way the Giants secondary has been playing poorly and is also banged up. I mean, they may be without Antrell Roll, so
yeah.
Wouldn't shock me in the least. And especially the Steelers, they always play a tough opponents tough. I mean, that's not a team that's going to quit and roll over and play dead.
Yep, and I think Polamalu is still out for the Steelers too. So everybody's got their vulnerabilities. We'll just see who can muster the courage to take this game. But this is going to be just a great matchup. Steelers and Giants, one for the ages. Now, here we got another matchup coming up. Undefeated Atlanta going against the Dallas Cowboys. The game is in Atlanta, so Atlanta's got that home field advantage, obviously. But this could be one of those games where the Cowboys show up and show why people still have faith in them. Cowboys at the Falcons. How do you see it?
I'm going Atlanta, and it's mainly because I think the Cowboys are just going to have to be pass happy again, whether DeMarco Murray plays or not. If not, I really don't have a heck of a lot of confidence in Felix Jones running the ball. And like I had mentioned earlier, the Giants just kind of became one-dimensional and weren't really throwing too deep against Dallas and seemed to be running the ball too much. Whereas with the Falcons, I mean, Matt Ryan's got 2 receivers. He's got Tony Gonzalez. He's got Turner. I just think they're going to be overmatched. They're going to overmatch the Dallas defense. I'm going Falcons.
Yeah, and what I liked was when I watched the Falcons play this past weekend, like I said, they had looked shaky the last couple of games, and they looked pretty vulnerable, and it looked like something may happen this past weekend against the Eagles, but it did not. They came out, they looked crisp, they looked hungry, it looked like they rededicated themselves to the game. So I like that to carry over, and in the Georgia Dome, I like the Falcons too. So Falcons over the Cowboys. Falcons improved to 8-0. Cowboys dropped to 3-5, and the turmoil will just swirl in Texas. Jerry is going to be so disappointed.
Oh yeah, he'll pick up the phone and start calling John Gruden among others, I'm sure.
Okay, last game we're going to pick, the Eagles at 3-4. At the Saints 2-5. The Saints with the worst, most pitiful defense in NFL history, really, through these first 7 games. If ever Michael Vick was going to rally his troops and win a game and do something positive, it has to be against this Saints defense. But there you got the Saints at home, and they've been losing games, they've been getting whooped, they've been getting beat up, but that pride is still there. You can still see that in the face of Drew Brees. Talk to me.
Definitely, and it's really another hard one to pick. Ultimately, I'm going with the Saints because of what you mentioned, Drew Brees. I don't think he's going to let his team not show up for 2 weeks in a row, and I think this may ultimately come down to a case of whichever team has the ball last wins. Don't expect much defense, expect a lot of offense, a lot of scoring, and at the end of the day, I'll take my chances with Drew Brees over Michael Vick. I'm pretty certain he'll have some sort of turnover that may swing the balance of the game, and going with the Saints.
Well, you know what? I wish I could be dramatic and go against you here, but I'm going with the Saints also. I think the way that Vic plays, he's going to get more chances than he got, obviously, against the Falcons, but ultimately, at home in the Superdome, I like New Orleans to go ahead and pull this game out, and then this may be the last time that Vic starts for the Eagles, depending on how they play that game. But I'm going with the Saints as well. So we only disagree on one game this week. That's the Giants and Steelers game. So we'll see. Maybe I'll catch you in picks this week, and maybe you'll stretch out that lead to 2 games. I'm sure that's another sidebar people will be looking at.
Yeah, and we'll even be watching that Steelers-Giants game with even more interest than usual.
There we go. All right, so, hey, folks, we're just about done here. And remember, next week, we're going to be breaking down the AFC and giving them a mid-season report card as well. Everybody, remember, you can follow me on Twitter at @TheInsideSports. Follow Chris on Twitter at ChrisLSports. And read his columns. Definitely, they're highly entertaining at footballnation.com. Before we sign off here, Mr. Lardieri, any final words?
That's it. I'm always putting my random observations out on Twitter, like you mentioned. Be sure to read my columns. I always appreciate it. And hope everyone enjoys their Halloween. I know it's probably going to be canceled in many parts of the Northeast, but enjoy. Don't eat too much candy. And remember, we've got a great Chargers-Chiefs matchup on Thursday night to look forward to.
That's going to be a great matchup?
Oh, it's going to be great if you have insomnia.
Yeah. And by the way, we're not picking that game, but off the record, I would pick the Chargers if we were picking that game, but that's an unofficial pick.
Yeah, likewise. And if the Chargers do lose, then I think there's a team right there where things might be swirling faster than they would be in Dallas. Yep,
heads will roll. So everybody, have fun. Be safe tomorrow night at Halloween. And by the way, all you kids out there, don't listen to what Chris said. You eat all the candy you want. That's what we say here at Inside Sports. Thanks for watching Football Talk. We'll see everybody next week for our AFC midseason report card. Thanks for watching.